Whether it's taxes, medical care, or transportation, there's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. And today we have former Congressman Ed Case to help us interpret what's going on. Welcome, Ed. Welcome back to the show.
Good to be back.
Thank you.
I missed you.
I know. Me too. I miss you too. So what's going on? I mean, you've been busy with you're a lawyer. Tell us what you've been doing.
Well, of course, I went back to practicing law at the Bay's Long Law Firm, where I've practiced for a number of years now. Little known fact is I've actually been a lawyer for the last 30 years, and so for me it's been easy to go back into the practice of law, which I enjoy. I enjoy helping people solve their problems, whether it's in government or in the legal arena. And I think it's been a real advantage for me over the course of my political career that that I've had a base, really, and a place to go back to as I was unsuccessful on the political side. And I think that that has really helped me in both, because I've learned a lot on the government side that has really been of great benefit to me in my business and legal world, and vice versa. And I think that, unfortunately, you see too many politicians nowadays that politics is all of their life. And I think that's not good for politics and probably not good for them.
It's so true. I mean, there definitely should be term limits, I think, and at least people should be able to have a life where they actually go to work and know what it's like to meet a payroll and all that before they go into government.
Absolutely. I mean, politics is a closed world, and the higher up in politics you get, the harder it is to stay in touch with the real world, in all honesty. And I had that experience when I was in the state legislature. At least for 8 months or 7 months a year, I wasn't actively in session every day, and I was back,
across the street at
coaching soccer or practicing law. Congress is a little different because that's a full-time job, and you get yourself into a pretty cloistered world. And so I think that the opportunity to have an experience in the so-called real world before you go into politics is valuable, and the opportunity to have something to go back to if you leave politics, voluntarily or involuntarily, is also valuable. One of the things you see in politics is people that really either don't have an option after politics or don't have anything that they really want to go back to, and they get a little compromised because for them it becomes purely about staying in office, and they go real safe on it. You just make no mistakes whatsoever because it's just so desperately needed to stay in it. And, for better or worse, I was never that person, which probably explains the result here.
Well, you've had your successes and then some of your failures in politics, and that's just, that builds character. What can I tell you?
Well, thank you for that. In that case, I have a lot of character now.
I give you credit for even doing it. I wouldn't want to run for politics.
Other than that, I've had a very, very long startup to-do list at home, and, Audrey and I, we bought our current house where we are right now, and it was a fixer-upper when I went into Congress, and that was 10 years ago, and I certainly didn't fix it up in the last 10 years, so I've been doing it for the last couple of months.
So now she's telling you, Ed, you better fix it up. You promised. And what about traveling? You both travel because Audrey works for the United Airlines, right?
She does, and so that's a unique advantage, actually, of her working for the airlines, of course, is that I can go off and travel when I want, which I haven't done as much as I'd like to do. Because I've got that long list, and because I'm busy at home. But we have managed to have some really nice trips since the election last year, and we've managed to go off and have time in the southwestern United States. And one of our children is working in Japan, so I've been to Japan a few times and cruised around with him over there, and here and there. So. I guess this is what normal life is like.
I know, it's hard to be normal when you've not been normal for so long.
I'm kind of getting used to it.
Welcome to our life, right? You have to have your bucket list now. Besides all the things you have to do at your house, your real bucket list.
I'm working on that.
Yeah. Well, so you've been in Congress, and now you're watching it from the outside. So what do you think about all the things going on? There's so many things to do with health care and transportation. The Jones Act has been in the news. We have taxes and sequestration and on and on and on. So maybe you can give us some thoughts about what's happening in Washington.
Well, I mean, I think obviously the biggest principal main theme in Washington is still the unbelievable division in Washington. I think that, when I went to Congress 10 years ago, it was bad. It was bad when I was in Congress. It was bad since, but it's worse now. One would think and one would hope that the consequences of this extreme partisanship and division would have gotten people disgusted, and because people got disgusted at that somehow they would elect people to Congress and that had a real goal to get away from that, and that they would reward that behavior, and that Congress, conversely, would think to themselves, well, we better get things done because the voters want us to. And that hasn't happened. And it's a little puzzle why that hasn't happened, because Congress is, and actually the federal government's evaluation is still down at like 10% favorable. So it makes things very, very hard to accomplish in Washington when you've got that kind of division and that kind of unresponsiveness, really, to the voters of the country. So, I honestly don't know when we're going to turn that corner. I hate to say it, but I think it's going to be with us for a while yet. And so we're going to have to try to look for, little successes along the way, or not so little successes, where you have pieces of bipartisanship that come through. Either that, or we're just going to face, crises like in Europe that force us to some form of compromise. And there's some, I don't want to be too negative on it, because there are some bright spots. There's people in Congress that want to get things done. I think we're going to see an immigration reform package that comes forward in the next weeks to months and gets accomplished. That's a
and
start.
It'll probably help people in Hawaii.
It will help people in Hawaii. It'll help people across the country. Our immigration system is broken. We've known that for a long, long time now, decades now. And so if we can get together and say, okay, on an issue that is as important as immigration, is as knotty as immigration, that we can get a bipartisan solution on immigration, that we can develop a little bit of momentum, maybe we can take on some of the issues that are even bigger than immigration, such as the budget, such as health care, such as preserving Social Security and Medicare, which by far are still our largest challenges, those issues: economy, budget, health care, Social Security, and Medicare. I mean, that's 80% of it right there.
Right. I know we could spend another 3 or 4 hours talking about that.
We could, and I'm sure I could.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
I think I remember enough about it.
I know. Well, sequestration is an issue that's been coming up. People have been talking about that, and how that the mandatory budget cuts are going to impact Hawaii, especially now that Senator Inouye is gone. How is that going to all fare out? I was just wondering if you could walk us through what you think about in terms of, is sequestration really having as much of impact? On one side you have people saying, oh, it's going to, they're going to go after the jobs that everybody cares about, the things that we can all see, versus maybe some things that really should be cut in government. What are your thoughts? Well,
first of all, let's back up and make one observation, and that is that sequestration is an artificial result of a failure to reach agreement on budgets. Sequestration was implemented because people couldn't get it done themselves in Congress, and so what they did was they set themselves an artificial result if they couldn't agree, thinking that would incentivize them to agree, which they didn't. And then sequestration kicked in. Plan B, right? Of course, well, it was just a chicken way of doing it, really, if you want to be blunt about it. It was a failure of leadership, and it still is, because obviously sequestration is still with us. And there's nothing about sequestration that cannot be reversed, modified, amended, changed now. This is not the law of the land that has come down from on high. This is something that Congress created and can change. And so obviously one of the challenges with, and so that's one problem with sequestration. The other problem was that it was not particularly related to a well thought through set of priorities in our budget, where you said, okay, look, we're spending too much in this area, we can't afford this anymore, but over in this area we really need to spend some more. And of course, it wasn't related to some of the very big picture issues in our country right now, such as, who should get taxed and how much, and where should our revenue be coming from, and how do we grow economies. And so, like I said earlier, it was a failure of leadership, and it was applied kind of across the board. And, across the board cuts are chicken ways of doing budgeting, because they don't have anything to do with what the actual needs are, the actual priorities, the actual careful thought that hopefully you would put into running a good family income or business budget. So I think the answer on the effect of sequestration on the country and on Hawaii is kind of somewhere between the sky is falling and it doesn't matter. The sky is not falling because of sequestration. Sequestration was a restriction on the growth of government, not for the most part an outright reduction in government. Because it was supposed to be a cut to the growth in government, so it's not even a cut to what was the existing budget, it was cut to the growth. That's exactly right. So in large part what we're saying is we're just not going to grow government as fast. Yeah. And I think the other thing about, so that's on that side of it. On the other side of it, when you apply kind of across-the-board meat axe to a problem, you're going to hurt somebody unfairly somewhere along the way. So those areas are going to be impacted. But when you take a look at how it affects Hawaii in particular, it'll affect, first of all, it'll affect federal programs across the board, some areas more than others. But probably the area that could be most impacted, or is being most impacted, I should say, is defense spending. And that's simply for two reasons. First of all, because there is so much defense spending here. And second, because defense on the national level is such a large part of the overall budget. And I think that there is a consensus in Washington, maybe they haven't acted on it yet, that we simply cannot afford the growth in defense spending. That's why you see the new secretary conducting an overall review of defense spending right now, because they know they have to make those cuts. And that's going to be an impact in Hawaii.
Now, how does it all balance out? We have Senator Inouye, who's no longer with us, and we have new representation in Congress from Hawaii. Of course, everybody's pretty new. And how is that all playing out? Because we, in a sense, we are going to be, President Obama's talked about moving troops this way to defend us in the Pacific, and yet you have this issue of defense spending getting cut, and we have a new delegation. How do you see it all kind of playing out?
Well, it is playing out, and so, you know, I'm not sure anybody can really particularly see where it's all going to go. I think there's some big picture comments that can be made. First of all, we are going to be spending a greater portion of our defense budget in the Asia-Pacific region. That's inevitable. That's just world history happening. And so from that perspective, we're obviously not going to be affected like you know, Virginia, for example, at Norfolk or something like that, or the constituencies that are more affected by how much money we spend in, you know, Europe. And so from that perspective, we're somewhat protected. But there's just such a major adjustment that's needed to our budget that for us to pretend that somehow we're not going to be affected at all because we're in the pivot zone in the Asia-Pacific, that's stupid for anybody to assume that. So places, for example, like Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, better be concerned about the next you know, 5 to 10 years. So that's one thing that's going on. And then, of course, the other thing that's going on is, as you point out, we've lost Senator Inouye, but not just Senator Inouye. We've lost you know, 70 years of seniority in the U.S. Senate and significant seniority in the U.S. House. We went from one of the most senior delegations to the most junior delegation in seniority, and that obviously has consequence.
You actually talked about this, and I have to give you credit for that. In 2006, when you ran for Senate, you were mentioning that you didn't want this very thing to happen. That was what inspired you to run. True,
but you know, having you know, been right doesn't make it feel any better. And you know, the fact of the matter is, voters made the decision that they made in 2006, and you can't go back and live in 2006. You can only live in 2013 and going forward. So the fact that I talked about it then, yeah, okay, I did, but so what? We're where we are today. I wish we had, you know, made some adjustments along the way, but again, we didn't, and so we have to deal with what we've got. And so obviously we have a great deal riding on a brand new congressional delegation that is very fluid themselves. I mean, you know, obviously Senator Hirono is elected for 6 years, but Senator Schatz is elected, you know, or appointed, I should say, for 2 years, and very much wants to be elected for a full 6, and so he's in a fluid situation. As far as I can tell you, we have 2 congresswomen who would like to run for something else. So
probably for Senate as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, neither of them has made any secret of the fact that they're considering other races, and they're certainly talking about those other races fairly publicly. So you know, it's not as if,
possibly governor, right, with Senator Hanapusa. So I mean, with Representative Hanapusa, who used
to
be Senator.
But I guess the point I was trying to make was that you know, we've benefited in Hawaii from a team that has had good, solid representation and some stability on both the House and the Senate sides. So I think that although I think that there probably will be some stability on the Senate side, you know, who knows what's going to happen on the House.
So I'll ask you a tough question, which you don't have to answer. Do you want to rate our delegation and tell me how you think they're doing? Who's the best? Who's the worst? Who's surprising you? Who's maybe not doing
You're
as much?
correct. I don't want to answer that.
I know, I always try to get you into trouble at least once when you're on the show.
I think I already got in trouble with one or two things I said.
I think you did, but not this show yet. So.
No, earlier.
Oh, earlier, okay.
Yeah. You know, I think that it's early to tell how this delegation is going to gel. Congressional delegations from Hawaii have had their, internal rivalries. People have, been running against people or have been thinking about running against people. Sometimes the rivalries go back into ancient history. But it's never gotten in the way of the delegation working together. And I think, in all honesty, from what I hear of the delegation, is they're not quite working together yet. And so they haven't gelled from that perspective. They don't have, one natural leader among them that's going to say, okay, I'm going to...
I think they're kind of still fighting it out. And then everybody has their own egos and their own issues and their own agenda.
You have Senator Schatz, and he's sitting there trying to run to be elected, and he knows Hanabusa is thinking about running against him, and they both know that Gabbard is thinking about, running for Senate, and is Hanabusa even going to be there? It gets in the way. And so I think I don't exactly know how it's going to unfold. I don't know who's going to make what decisions and when. They have to make them pretty soon.
So what do you think about a Brian Schatz Hanabusa race? What would you think? How would that turn out? It's hard to say.
Who knows? I mean,
it's kind of far out for it to tell now.
I think that I think they're both quite accomplished people. I've worked with both of them for a long period of time. I respect both of them, and I think that either one of them would have made and is making either a good member of the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate. So they're capable of doing that job. I think that they just have their own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to campaigning statewide and winning a United States Senate campaign. I will say that having experienced it firsthand, there's nothing like the power of incumbency for the United States Senate, and so I think that and Senator Schatz knows that full well. I think that he probably knows better than most, if not all, people how to work as a United States Senator in such a way as to encourage his reelection.
Maximize the campaign donations. You don't have to say it, I will.
No, it's not just that, because of course everybody does. That to some extent, but just working the interest groups, and so I don't know how it's going to turn out. I think that we're obviously in a period of fluidity with our congressional delegation. I hope it settles down and stabilizes, because we need them. We need them to settle down and stabilize and start pulling together. Kind of the honeymoon's over.
Definitely. Now, what about the next election? You're going to have the governor's race, lieutenant governor's race, and the Republican side doesn't really seem to have anyone in the works at all. And then, you have the congressional races again, right? And one U.S. Senator race. So it's a big race again.
It could be. We don't, it is a big year, because, it's not every year that you have one U.S. Senator and, two members of the House of Representatives, U.S. Congress, and one governor and lieutenant governor, and a couple of mayors up, and of course a fair number of the state legislators that are up. So it is one of those larger elections. I think that what'll determine how big it is and how important it is and how much of a fork in the road it presents is kind of what both Hanabusa and Gabbard do, because if they stay in place, then the opportunities for people to contest for those seats are not there unless they want to take on incumbents, and if they leave those seats, then one of the real consequences of Senator Inouye's passing is that a power center that has held together Hawaii politics, for better or worse, and I think it's been both, passed from the scene, and so there's a power vacuum, and nobody has to go kiss anybody's ring to run, other than, unless you want to call it, the business community or the unions or those who are still pretty powerful. But it's not like Senator Inouye saying, I want this person rather than that person, and everybody kind of falls in line because they're just scared of him. So I think that I think that this kind of cultural thing in Hawaii politics of wait your turn has kind of been blasted out the window. So I think there are a number of folks out there that have no intention whatsoever of waiting their turn if they have half the chance. And so we could either have a pretty stable year next year, or we could have a pretty good free-for-all. And, you know, either way, it'd probably be pretty good.
Probably be pretty interesting for people to watch, huh? I still don't see the Republican side. You might have Charles DeGioia, you might have Linda Lingle again, but there really doesn't seem to be too many young people coming up. And in terms of Governor Lingle, I think she kind of wore out her welcome, and she maybe, you know, I think she didn't do very well, so not sure how well that's going to go. Charles, I guess that's a possibility. We'll see what happens. What about you? Do you think you'll ever go back into politics? What's your plans?
I don't have a plan. That's really my answer. There is nothing whatsoever about you know, public service that you know, I've been turned off on over the years. I would, you know, in my own choice of worlds, I'd love to be serving today. That hasn't been how it's turned out for me for a number of reasons, and I'm, you know, on one hand sad about that, but on the other hand, I'm leading a good life, and I'm grateful for that. So I think that, and I think that I still have a lot to contribute somehow and somewhere, and I really, frankly, haven't figured out exactly what that is at this point. It's you know, I've lived my entire adult life, you know, having a good, solid profession, but also believing that there was more that needed to be contributed, and I've been able to do that. But whether that's going to be in politics, I don't know. And I'm not sitting here calculating, you know, where my next opportunity is. I think it's more a matter of just, you know, this is a time to step back and take a look at the big picture, and perhaps take some reflection and removal from it. Enjoy the daisies, as you say, and you know, if an opportunity comes along, I'd look at it, but it's not like I'm trying to create it.
So one of the big issues that you tackled when you were in Congress was the Jones Act, and we have that coming up again and again, where some people would say in Hawaii that maybe raises prices of whatever is shipped in here, maybe 30%, somewhere around there. It's for people that don't know what the Jones Act is, why don't you sum it up for them?
Jones Act is a federal law that basically says that only U.S. ships can transit cargo between U.S. ports. So since there is very, very little U.S. shipping in the world, very little U.S. shipping in the world, that essentially creates a monopoly. And the monopoly is not maybe so bad, or at least it's not as much of a monopoly if you have alternatives such as, you know, buses and trains and planes to transit your cargo, like on the Mississippi River. But when you're an island state like Hawaii, you don't have those alternatives, and so what happens is the Jones Act effectively creates what amounts to a monopoly.
And it's not just Hawaii, it's Guam and Puerto Rico.
Guam and Puerto Rico are also, and Alaska, by the way.
Mm-hmm. And Samoa, kind of, in a sense, right? American Samoa.
The CNMI and Virgin Islands don't have a Jones Act. That's unique to their background, and that's an interesting case study right there, the differences between them. I think there are a couple of things we can say about the Jones Act without there being too much disagreement at this point. The first is that Jones Act shipping is higher than non-Jones Act shipping. That's just a function of the market. I don't think there's any disputing that whatsoever. There's a dispute about how much higher it is. And the second thing we can say is that, you know, if one were in a perfect world, you'd love only U.S. ships to be, you know, transiting between U.S. ports, especially Hawaii mainland, for some potential national security arguments. If you had a thriving U.S. merchant marine and maritime industry, which we don't, and we won't. I don't think we'll ever get back to where we were. So that kind of, you know, frames the argument on the Jones Act. And it's like, what's your trade-off? You know, do you think that there should be lower consumer costs in return for some flexibility in the market and some possible risk down the road of disruptions in shipping? I don't think those disruptions justify the Jones Act, and other people make a different decision. Puerto Rico just had a study completed by the federal government that basically came to that conclusion, and the commissioner from Puerto Rico, the non-voting member of Congress from Puerto Rico, is actually introducing a resolution to to try to loosen the Jones Act restrictions on Puerto Rico. You take a look at Hawaii, and sometimes it's the law of unintended consequences. We have, of course, an incredible and perhaps unexpected surplus of natural gas in this country that is depressing energy prices, which is good. We can't take advantage of that here. Why? Because the way you get natural gas anywhere in the world is by liquefying it, liquefied natural gas, and then you transport it, and you put it on a ship. They have ships out there that transport LNG. So if we could transport LNG from the mainland to Hawaii, we wouldn't have to depend on a gas monopoly, which is what we have. But there are absolutely no Jones Act LNG ships. There's no way to do that.
I know.
So that's an interesting question for the members of Congress, all of whom support the Jones Act.
Yes.
Are you going to carve out an exemption so that Hawaii's energy prices can be substantially reduced over the midterm, really, by transporting LNG here?
Another impact, we don't have very long on the show, but another impact I just want to mention was also on the cattle industry, the cattlemen's industry, and you have been very helpful to the ranchers to try to help them get exemptions and so on.
Well, there the situation is a little different because not only does the Jones Act restrict shipping and increase costs from the mainland to Hawaii, which is most of the market, it also does it in reverse. So you cannot transport cattle from Hawaii to the mainland unless you're on a Jones Act ship, and there the costs are absolutely destructive to the cattle industry. Similar with flowers, by the way, and anything else we export that can go on a ship. There's no real option.
Right. Well, we only have about 30 seconds, but give me the lowdown on what do you think the three main things, just list them, what do you think the three main top issues will still be in Congress this year?
The top issue is getting things done on a partisan, nonpartisan basis. That's number one. Number two, that's going to affect everything else. Number two, budget and finances. And I think number three still has to be the economy because I think it's shaky and it needs help.
Good. All right. Well, I'm so glad you came today.
Thank you.
Welcome back. We'll have to have you back on again, and then maybe you can break the news when you decide to run again for office here.
No.
Don't tweet it out. Come on this show, okay? All right, Ed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.